Ah, the dreaded term paper. Somebody's foisting one of these upon you at the end of every semester, right? Well, is it some kind of chore, or is it your chance to dance, your chance to really sharpen your focus on one of the innumerable concepts that have come up this semester and allow you to walk away remembering it for the rest of your life? Well, if you look at it that way, it's a lot more fun to go through the process, and you know, we're doing it anyway, so might as well, right? Let's take a quick look at 3 examples of term papers. They should be exemplary, having appeared in Hohonu, which is the journal of what's supposed to be the best academic writing produced on the UH Hilo campus. We're going to go a little quickly through all 3 of these, so you should probably have it out while you're looking at it, each one of these. And quick and dirty, here we are, we're looking at the one entitled Hippies Are High in Dietary Fiber, an analysis, a rhetorical analysis of a book called Skinny Bitch by a student named Jessica Gard. Now, this is not a literary analysis, it's a rhetorical analysis, but we can kind of get the idea of what's expected by taking a look at this. First thing a teacher's going to do is look for a thesis statement, and we have one of those down at the bottom of the first paragraph, where the author of the paper is arguing that the authors of the text she's analyzing are in some kind of manipulative way making an argument for turning vegan. That's the first thing a teacher will look at. The second thing the teacher will look at is they'll look for signs of the dreaded assignment sheet fulfilling exercise. That means, I'm sure you've all been assigned a paper that must be at least 7 to 10 pages. Well, what happens then? The goal, of course, becomes getting to the end of page 7 by any means possible. And you've already seen enough of these probably in peer reviews, where you see folks writing lots of nothing, particularly as they struggle towards the finish line at the end of page 7. We can just look at the last 2 paragraphs here, and you see that both of these paragraphs not only are full of a little bit of new information that advances the analysis, but they don't unnecessarily just repeat things either, just to make it to the end of page 7 and make it look long. The next thing teacher will do is look at each one of these paragraphs and make sure there's some kind of analytical point that backs up the thesis statement. And you can go one by one through this paper, and there's not a lot of fat you'd want to cut out if you were editing this paper for length to make it shorter, and each of these analyses is pretty on point if they're trying to back up the author's thesis statement. Okay, now let's move on to the number 2 paper in your resources section. This also comes from Hohonu, and it looks as though it was written for a version of English 323. It's not one that I've taught, but obviously it addresses mainly the Haunani K. Trask article of decolonizing Hawaiian literature. Hawaiian, not literature of Hawaii that encompasses everything, but Hawaiian literature once again. If we apply those same 2 initial teacher questions, it's a little hard to come up with a thesis at the beginning of this paper, and other than I kind of disagree with Haunani K. Trask. And then it doesn't take too long for you to start seeing that this particular writer of this paper was pretty severely infected by the assignment sheet problem, which is how do you get to the end of page 7 or whatever the teacher had assigned for an arbitrary length of a paper, because all it seems to do over and over again is say, I really disagree with Haunani K. Trask. That's fine, but what you're doing is, what I see here is somebody, Haunani K. Trask has spent a lifetime doing this scholarship in order to come up with the argument that you saw in Decolonizing Literature of Hawaii. And somebody else came along and was assigned that article in a class and just decided to go, you know what, I disagree. And then they really didn't have a whole lot more to say. So there are ways to take a look at what's happening in Haunani Trask's article, and of course putting it into the context of everything that we've read so far will give you a lot to talk about and a lot to analyze. But this one sadly doesn't do any of that, and if we were to give it a grade, I don't think it would get to the point where it's getting a grade. This looks like a very, very early first draft from somebody who was just kind of provoked by that decolonizing literature of Hawaii article, and there isn't really much analysis happening here. Now let's go to the third one. That's Matthew S. Therian. This is for English 448. I think this was the graphic novel course taught by Kirsten Mollegard. Now, we can apply those same two questions, right? Where's the thesis? Well, the thesis seems to be that the American dream, as we traditionally know it, is unavailable to Americans of Asian descent. But if you look all the way at the end, and this is not, a bad way to do it, Matthew came to a more rousing conclusion and a more kind of sharper, pointed analytical thesis in his concluding sentence, and it's even worth reading. The American dream is becoming broader and broader every day. However, the Asian American community does not need to wait for inclusion, but can be active in creating a new image of the American dream that's rooted in the reconciliation of identity. If someone gave me that particular sentence as an assignment for my paper, and I had read American-Born Chinese and Shortcomings, which are the two pieces of literature, these graphic novels that Matthew had under analysis, that would be an easy paper to write. The thesis statement gives you 80% of your work. You know exactly where to go after reading a pointed argument like that. Looking back, it's a lot harder to make something out of, I kind of disagree with Haunani K. Trask. It doesn't really go anyplace. Now, this particular paper, Matthew's paper, is a different assignment, obviously, from the one that you have, because he's included these outside sources from these cultural theorists. You don't need to do that. The only thing that you have under analysis for your paper comes from the works that you've read for this class. That can include Haunani and Seri and the introductions for Growing Up Local and for a Hawaiian Reader, but we're focusing mainly on your analysis of the actual texts. And we've seen some pretty deep thinking just in the posts that you've written for the class. Point of a term paper is to take one of those ideas that would come up in a post, take your time with it and do the complete analysis like Matthew has done here. There's no evidence in this paper that suggests he was aiming to finish at a certain page number length, a certain number of sources if that's the case. Every one of his paragraphs does some deep analysis of either American-Born Chinese or Shortcomings in order to explore that idea of what the American dream is and is supposed to mean for Asian Americans, in this case focusing more on Asian American male characters. We can think back to when Matthew is about 2/3 of the way through the semester and somebody said, hey, what's your topic going to be? And his topic was going to be, let me write about the American dream. That's not a thesis yet, okay? But as he went through the drafting process, writing the first draft, getting feedback, talking to the teacher, talking to his classmates, he then sharpened this into an arguable point. That's a thesis. If somebody asks you, what is your thesis? And you say, it's about historical trauma, that's not a thesis, okay? It needs to be a point that is arguable and needs to be proved and isn't obvious, like I disagree with Haunani, okay? So if I'm grading these papers, the analysis of the book Skinny Bitch gets an A, and the Sketching Yellow Picket Fences by Matthew gets an A, and then the what's the title of that one? Literature in Hawaii, who gets to write it? That's a big question right there that really could have turned into an interesting analysis of just a comparison between maybe Michener and Moriyama and maybe one of the other indigenous writers that we've read. That right there, showing where each of these things fits contextually, would have made a fascinating paper. I would have wanted this particular writer to spend more time ruminating over that question, because it's a really good question that unfortunately, maybe it was written the night before and there is a deadline issue with this. I don't know. Okay, now you're heading into your first drafts. These are final drafts. First draft should be messy, should be finished all the way to the end. Of course, it will be handwritten. It will include all the quotes that you expect to use. It's okay to have it skip from one thing to the next and not flow well. We're not at that point yet. You should write it pretty quickly, even though it's going to be many, many pages long. And that allows you to start getting in this dreamlike state where you're wrapping your head around the complicated idea that you're addressing here. Okay, there will be multiple times to revise it. But what we don't want is, well, I'll get to that part later because it's not the real draft. This is the real draft, okay? The first draft is the real draft in a low stakes way. Everything that you're talking about in the final should appear in its messy, kind of rough form in the first draft. Trust me, this it's the best way to put it is you're writing a lot more stuff in order to do a lot less work, because you're not going to get jammed up with writer's block. Give me a call, send me a text. I love talking this stuff over. This is my favorite part of the semester. Thanks.